Hello everyone. I understand we're back to the question and answer session. So I'm going to start with a question about consent, and we've been asked, does implied consent still exist? The answer to that is basically only for an examination. If a patient turns up, sits in the dental chair, opens their mouth, then implied consent for the examination does exist. It's unsafe to use implied consent for any other procedure that you carried out. The patient does need to know about anything else before you carry it out. So that answers that question.
Okay, the next question is, can a dentist make a claim against another? Question mark, when an emergency dentist sees a patient and makes a leading comments such as, I can't believe your dentist missed this obvious decay, instead of dealing with the urgent issue and asking the patient to go back to his dentist for treatment. I think this covers a wide range of issues. I think it's important not to confuse the need to be transparent with the patient in terms of your findings with feeling the need to criticise others. When I was a boy dental student, I was taught never criticise a colleague because you never know the circumstances under which the treatment was carried out. And that's absolutely true. The fact that the patient tells you it was only 3 months since this filling was done or whatever, it really doesn't necessarily mean that that's actually the case. So it's really important to give an objective view of one's findings. You have a duty to do that. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that you don't, explain all your findings because you don't want to get someone else into difficulty or whatever. But if you take some bite wings and the moths have been at both the teeth and the bone, then it's important that you explain that to the patient and you record it in your notes. But you don't make assumptions about the others. Now, if a patient asks a direct question and says, well, I'm really unhappy about this, blah, blah, then you quite simply say, well, I wasn't privy to that conversation, I wasn't there at the time, but I'd suggest you go back to the practice where you were treated and raise any concerns that you have there, and keep it simple and objective. And occasionally you'll see a pattern of this if there are particular concerns. And again, I mentioned Principle 8, speak to your defence organisation about ways of approaching this if you see a whole pattern of this. Okay.
There's a very interesting question here, which is, if the complaint is at practice level, is it better to get the indemnity involved or try and resolve it with the patient without involving indemnity? My answer would be always involve us. We are expert at providing responses which will try and resolve the complaint as swiftly as possible, but also protect your position if it doesn't get resolved and it moves on to a third party, such as the Ombudsman or the Dental Complaints Service. We are, with the responses we provide, it's always done in a way which puts you in the best light, and we try to get them. We're used to dealing with these day in and day out, so always involve your indemnity organisation would be my advice. And no matter how trivial you think a complaint is, some of them can spiral out of control. So get in touch with us at the earliest opportunity. Just phone us, give us a call. We can advise you about how to handle any sort of complaint. So just get in touch with us would always be my advice.
Okay, the next question, a colleague's asked what factors to look for when selecting an indemnity provider. I'll try and answer this in as unbiased a way as I can. I think the important thing is to be aware and to know the difference, because there are very significant differences between some types of indemnity provider. So DDU is one of the 3 not-for-profit mutual organisations, so owned by our members, and there are also some insurance providers whereby you have an insurance certificate, and you need to understand the significance and the difference between each of them before you make that choice. So in particular, for example, claims made insurance, you have to look at the exact details of it, but that might require that you need to purchase runoff cover if you move. There's something called death, disability and retirement. Sometimes that's included, not always, but sometimes. But often a question arises if you move when you're mid-career, how do you cover the past treatment that you've provided? Because the GDC requires that you need to do that. And you need to understand those issues that arise, whereas with a defence organisation, that's already part of the occurrence basis. So there are significant differences. You need to ask the right questions and talk in detail to the people who you're considering using. Look at the track record, look at the people who are going to give the advice, because it's not just indemnity. Indemnity is payment for claims, but there's also risk management advice, complaint handling advice, etc. So it's a whole range of different things. And talk to colleagues and find out what service they've had. But it's not just for now, it's for the future. So remember that if you buy travel insurance for a week on holiday, you'll know by the end of that week whether it's done what it needed for you. But in this instance, sometimes claims can come in 10, 15, 20 years after the event, and you have to know what provision there is for that when you choose what type of indemnity you particularly want. Leo?
Lovely. This is a really good question. If we have a patient with extremely high expectations where we don't feel confident to treat, can we refuse the patient and refer to a colleague and then perhaps at a different practice? Or if he/she doesn't want to go somewhere else, can we refuse to do the treatment? Well, the simple answer is yes, you can refuse to treat. In fact, if you don't think you can meet that patient's expectations, it's best not to start the treatment. You do have to have that sensitive conversation with the patient as to why you don't think you're the best person to treat them, and explain why in a way that the patient understands. But when I was working full-time as a periodontist, I used to work in a number of different places, and also I didn't do much surgery. I never got into any of the cosmetic surgery. So people said to me, can you do a gum graft? I said, well, I can, but I might not be the best person to do it. You'd be better off seeing someone who does a lot of these and has much better skill at doing them. So it was right for me to manage their expectations. If patients were saying to me, can you get my teeth sorted out before my son or daughter's wedding or whatever it was, I want to have the smile makeover, I'd be saying, no, I can't. I can't do it. I'm not the right person to treat you. I'm not going to have the time to get it done in that time. So it's absolutely fine to not start treatment on someone where you don't think you'll be able to manage their expectations. One of the really difficult situations that people sometimes face is that you don't appreciate how high a patient's expectations are until you're part way through the treatment. And that's really difficult to deal with. So when you're faced with that, again, get in touch with us and we can discuss with you when's the best time to bail out and to say, that's as far as I can go. I can't do any more. You need to see someone else who's got greater expertise in the particular area. But yes, you can refuse to see a patient if you don't think you can meet their expectations. John?
Okay, there's one here, and I'll answer this directly. It's a slightly thornily put, but I'll answer it anyway. All the time we're talking about only the behaviour of dentists, patients' expectations and their wishes, their fears of the dentist, and that we need to care about them. However, why don't we discuss patients' behaviour in the surgery and dentist's expectation of them? Well, absolutely, it's a two-way street. I mean, for a start, for example, practices have a zero tolerance policy of poor behaviour and all the rest of it. but often it's a much more subtle than that, and it's at a lower level. And there are ways that we can deal with this. Colleagues often ask, how do I stop treating this patient because it's not good for either of us, and that's the approach to take, really. So the conversation can be had along the lines of, for dentistry to be carried out optimally, it must be carried out in an atmosphere of mutual trust and respect. And from some of the things you've said, etc., or whatever's happened recently, I don't sense that trust and respect exists between us. And if you don't have confidence in the advice and treatment that I'm offering, then it's not in your best interest for me to continue to treat you. And at that point, the patient's got two options. They can either say, oh no, I'm just a bit anxious or whatever, in which case one makes a note of the conversation to revisit at a later date if things don't improve. Or the patient says, you know what, you're right, I don't trust you and I'm off, which works for both parties. But you shouldn't continue on and on and on tolerating conduct from a patient that isn't appropriate. It's that seesaw of life that I mentioned earlier on. Don't let a couple of patients on one side of it spoil the way it sits. And again, talk to your defence organisation. We have ways of dealing with that. Just to tell patients you're not willing to treat them anymore can often precipitate a further complaint that takes up even more of your time. But there are techniques that we can use to actually end that dentist-patient relationship in a way that doesn't put you in further peril. So I hope that answers that one.
There's another interesting one here in terms of advertising. What's our opinion on website claims such as the North's leading dentist? Anything like that could cause a person who's written that some difficulty. All advertising must be legal, decent, honest and truthful. You must be able to substantiate any claim that you make. And we do sometimes see this, that especially with websites, that the website might have been designed by someone who is not a registrant and pops in these sort of marketing type phrases that then cause the dental registrant a problem. Typical ones are, pain-free dentistry guaranteed. That phrases like that can cause you all sorts of problems. So the way that the GDC will normally deal with this, if it comes to their attention, is they'll let the registrant know that they've been made aware that there is this potentially misleading phrase or statement on a website, and tell people that they should amend it. They don't automatically now take action against people, although they used to. So they have changed that. But avoid anything that could be misleading. So phrases like the North's leading dentist, the South's leading dentist, any of those sorts of things, avoid them. And look at your practice websites, see what they say about you. The other thing that sometimes happens is people say that they're specialists when they're not, or infer specialism when they're not on a list. You have to be very careful about that. The GDC do not like that at all. And a practice cannot refer to itself as a specialist practice unless all the dentists who work at that practice are on a specialist list. So again, those sorts of things can catch people out. So be careful of those.
Okay, this question here, frustration I think born of, what percentage of the day should be allocated to record keeping relative to clinical practice? And I empathise with this one. I mean, it's about learning the art of putting the key points in there. You don't have to necessarily write War and Peace, but it's that logical approach. As I say, some of the template records can be a bit fraught, because if we've got 6 years worth of appointments with 12 identical entries for exam, all with the same typo in, then it can start to call into question, whether everything that's in that note actually happened 12 times. But you can use templates as an aid memoir, But if they're clearly populated, you know, actively, and there's free text in there, then that's clear. It doesn't have to be hugely detailed in terms of prose or whatever, but the key points that are discussed, complains of, you know, the investigations that you've done, the findings, the diagnosis, the conversation with the patient, the options, the patient's preferences, etc. It doesn't have to take forever, but I genuinely appreciate that in busy practices it is incredibly difficult, but it's worth it. I mean, 99% of the time we spend on record keeping will never see the light of day. But Leo will tell you that sometimes a colleague comes in and there's a complaint or of whatever nature, and the reliance on that record and the comfort that they give in helping us to defend you makes all of that time really worthwhile. So I do empathise. It doesn't have to be, you know, an essay, but make sure the key points are in there. Leo?
Absolutely. I mean, it's so much nicer when we're able to draft a letter for a member to send which says, and my records show that I did this, rather than I would normally do this. It's just, it puts you in a much more comfortable position being able to say my records back this up. So yeah, but I sympathise with the length of time it takes. Yeah. So the next question: a patient makes a complaint about a previous treating dentist who no longer works at the practice. The patient did not complain before or even at the time of the treatment, which was over 5 years ago, but now wants to raise a complaint. What should you do, and where does the responsibility lie? Well, the liability, the clinical responsibility for the treatment lies with the treating clinician. Each treating clinician is responsible for care, the advice that they provide for any patient. Hopefully the practice complaints procedure would say that if there is a clinical complaint, it will be passed to the clinician concerned. The practice owner has the responsibility for ensuring that the complaint is handled, and often that will be, we've received the complaint, we will pass it on to the treating clinician, and then making sure that the treating clinician does respond. But a complaint of over 5 years ago, you're heading into the realms where it's much easier to say that you know, it's difficult to respond to this now because we can't get hold of the dentist necessarily, and so the longer it takes for a patient to complain, the more difficult it can be to be able to provide a substantive response. But if you're a practice owner, your responsibility is to make sure the complaint is responded to, so ensuring that it's passed on to the appropriate people. If they don't respond, then get back in touch with the patient, say, look, I tried to contact them, you know, I can't comment on the treatment that was provided. All I can do is say this is what's in the records. That might be something that you need to do. But again, get in touch with your defence organisation. We can discuss how best to respond, what to pass on to the treating clinician, etc. So just get in touch with us.
Okay, the next one. Should there be greater action by defence unions and the BDA to ensure that all complaints directly made to higher regulatory bodies are mandatorily signposted back to practice level to give dentists a chance to resolve at local level? Trust me, we work really hard as stakeholders, and not just DDU, other bodies as well, to try and change things to the benefit of the professions. And we have regular meetings. It wouldn't be appropriate for us to sort of publish the detail of all of those meetings, etc. But it is something that there is strong evidence, and I showed you some of the figures earlier on, that a number of steps have been taken to get things back at a local level. And it was, the initiative was in England first of all, but I believe Wales are on board with it now, and I think there's talk of Scotland doing it, where the GDC in particular will send things back to the NHS at a local level for resolution. And sometimes, to be honest, they're resolved at a local level without even needing any intervention. But it is the sort of thing that we work tirelessly at. Yes, the answer, the short answer is yes. We're doing those things right now.
Right. Next question. How many months or years is it acceptable or usual after treatment has finished for a patient to be given a refund if they complain they're unhappy with what was done? That's an interesting question, and there's not a simple or straightforward answer to that. It's entirely at the discretion of the person who is responding to the complaint. Some people will choose to offer a refund to conclude a complaint swiftly, even if it's many years later. Some people don't think it's appropriate to offer a refund, even if the treatment was done very, very recently. It is up to the clinician to decide whether they want to offer a refund or not. And again, if you get in touch with your defence organisation, we can discuss with you the advantages and disadvantages of how to respond to the complaint. Often, if a patient requests a refund and you are willing to give it on the understanding that it concludes the complaint fully, you will get rid of the complaint swiftly. So it's something for you to think about doing, but it's not mandatory that you do it. It is your choice. If somebody has left the practice and funds are being withheld by the practice, which is quite common, to deal with issues such as this, again, the contract should set out clearly how much is going to be withheld, how it's going to be used, at what level the person who the complaint is about, what level of refunds will be given before they're contacted, all of that. So again, with your contracts, look at them carefully before you sign them. Make sure that those sorts of arrangements are in place, because they can be really helpful to both parties, because it means that the complaint can often be resolved swiftly, and that's in everybody's interest. But at the end of the day, a refund of fees is offered as a gesture of goodwill.
Right, I think Leo's frozen up there, but I think he's pretty much answered that one. I'm going to answer one last one, but it's been answered. It's been asked multiple times, and I'll do it as a 2-in-1. So, is your annual indemnity fee with DDU like to go up if you call and ask for advice? The answer is, hand on heart, absolutely not. It's on our website. We cannot say it more clearly. You pick up the phone as often as you like, and it has no impact on your subscription whatsoever. We're here to offer you advice. We take hundreds of phone calls a week. I take lots of them. The opportunity to talk things through with a colleague at an early stage nips things in the bud and prevents things from escalating. So the answer is, calling us up for advice has no impact whatsoever on your subscription, and anybody who tells you different, refer them to me. The final, very quick one is, how long does DDU protect you for after retirement, and for how long? Or does DDU protect you after retirement, and for how long? The answer is yes, and forever is the answer to that. So hopefully that's a positive one to end on. Thank you for all your questions. I will see if we can get some more of these from the organisers, and we'll find a way of answering more through FMC if that's something that they'd like us to do, because there's lots of questions that we just haven't had a chance to get to. But I hope we've answered some of the key themes, and thank you very much for your attention this afternoon.